Hello everyone, this is Nick here with What Game Now, and today we are going to go ahead and talk about Warcaster Neo-Mechanika. Our first gameplay video went up, should be up by the time this video is out, and what this video is going to do is talk about the universe and some major gameplay ideas that I think are really cool about the game and some major selling points. But it's predominantly a story and world primer to provide context to this game. So, what in the heck is Warcaster Neo-Mechanika? Well, it is a full-fledged miniatures game. It's a sci-fi game. It's a skirmish miniature game made by Privateer Press. What this means is it's a traditional miniatures game where you will buy models, you'll paint models, you'll assemble them. It's not a board game, okay, or like their games like Riot Quest or the smaller scale games. As a skirmish game, it focuses on low model count. You're not dealing with large numbers of models. This game plays pretty consistently with 25 or less. And it is a sci-fi universe. Players are going to field armies drawn from one of the various factions, plus any wildcards, which are almost mercenaries who will play for them, and battle for control across 1,000 worlds in a far-flung galaxy. A couple key points about the game. It is an It is an alternating activation system. What that means is you will go with a small portion of your army and then your opponent will. No sitting around for 20 minutes while your opponent just blows you off the table. There is no points system. It's simply, hey, I want to play this. That's all you got to do. Units actually respawn and are summoned onto the table, and there's a deck building mechanic involved. We'll come back to these in a little more detail once we've gone through the world. So Warcaster Neo-Mechanika takes place within the same universe as the War Machine and Hordes miniature game produced by Privateer Press. Specifically, it's after an event called the Oblivion Crisis. And the Oblivion Crisis or event, it's not exactly called that in universe, it's just the thing going on right now, is a not quite end times level event where the world is being invaded by extra-dimensional beings called Infernals, who are collecting a debt owed to them of the souls of 2/3 of humanity. Needless to say, humanity was not keen on paying this debt. So, in order to help stave off annihilation, some members of a cult called the Convergence of Cirrus built a Stargate. It's the only way to say it. From which they were able to evacuate humans from the planet into a brand new galaxy. This galaxy is called the Cirrus Galaxy, and our story here picks up 5,000 years later. Humanity has expanded across this new galaxy. It has fought against itself and various alien races. It has forgotten its past. No magic, souls, the old gods. But, as with any new world, new wars and new feuds have been sparked. So let's talk a bit about the Cirrus Galaxy itself. It is a full-sized galaxy, and within it are a number of planets connected by a warp gate network called the Hyperonian. And what this is there are various warp gates that activate during certain times. They go from one place to another, and they allow instantaneous travel across large distances. This network was built by an alien race called the Architects, who dominated the galaxy prior to humanity's arrival, and humanity actually fought them when they arrived. The Architects fled to Cirrus Prime, a massive celestial body at the center of this network where they have sat for 5,000 years, stewing and waiting for their revenge. Humanity, in the meantime, has expanded across this warp network and created a domain known as the Thousand Worlds. And within this, nations, governments, corporations, cults, and movements have all spawned up and have coalesced into various power blocks that are currently vying for control of the galaxy. The reason they're vying for control of the galaxy is within the Cirrus Galaxy is a unique resource called Arcanescence, or ARC for short. It's essentially a pseudo-magical superfuel that allows machines, that allows robots to do things above and beyond. And humanity has used this as a power source. But, as with any power source, humanity has used a fair bit of it, and it's starting to become scarce. Which brings us to the war and conflict. By the way, before we keep going, all the images here are the official Privateer Press stuff, because I thought they looked really cool and they highlight what we're talking about. So these are all from Privateer Press. They did an excellent job. Why don't we use them? Anyway, back to the conflict. With Arc running out, tensions have flared between the various nations and violence has erupted across the Thousand Worlds. Within humanity, though, some humans are actually receptive to Arc. They can actually work with it, they can survive around it, and some can even control it. These individuals are referred to as Warcasters, and they manipulate Arc at a grand level to move power across the battlefield with their troops. The reason they're called Warcasters is because they're very similar to the Warcasters in the old War Machine universe, who are beings of legend and myth across the Thousand Worlds. Because of the massive distances involved, most battles are fought on a small scale. A ship from one faction will arrive through a warp gate and begin deploying forces at a key target. The troops are deployed via small-scale warp gates themselves. Humanity has actually mastered a short-range teleportation technology, and it's through these warp gates that troops arrive to the battlefield under the direction of a Warcaster. The Warcasters actually aboard the ship, guiding them throughout the conflict. And the armies of humanity are backed up by artificial machines called warjacks, which are customizable giant robots that are very powerful but very fuel intensive. So let's talk about the people involved and who's fighting. Currently, there are 6 teased, 4 actual factions in the game. Now, I want to point out that they have left the door open. There are more coming. We know that there's more coming. It's teased very heavily. It's even implied that the majority of them are actually going to be non-human, because sci-fi. So we're going to talk about the Marcher Worlds, the Ironstar Alliance, and the Eternal Continuum, which are the 3 full-fledged factions currently in the game. Wildcards, which are not actually a faction, although I suspect in the long term they will be. The Empyreans, who are the next faction coming out, and then the Keepers, who are teased in the rulebook as a 5th faction. Let's start with the Marcher Worlds. Officially called the Coalition of Free States, the Marcher Worlds are essentially I don't want to say the dregs of humanity, but they're the loners, they're the self-sufficient, rugged frontier types. They have moved away from the center of the Hyperonian, which is ruled over by their arch-enemy, the Ironstar Alliance, or the ISA. They seek freedom, prosperity, and effectively to live their own lives. Now, unfortunately, they can't do that by themselves, so they have merged together to form the Coalition of Free States. On the tabletop, they are composed of unconventional fighters, mercenaries, and things like that, featuring a slightly lower tech feel when compared to their opponents. They are not as well funded. They are not as prosperous. But their rugged sense of independence and free-thinking style allows them to combat their much more numerous foes. The Ironstar Alliance is the central faction of humanity. The center of the Hyperonian is ruled over by this alliance of governments, nations, and companies that have formed together in an aim for mutual defense and prosperity. Realizing that there's power through unity, they seek to unite all of humanity under their banner. Unfortunately, that banner is controlled by fear and the promise of power and expansion. So it's not entirely popular. However, because they are the central hub, they are on the most developed worlds. They have a very well-funded army with high technology, and their elite paladin infantry make a solid core for their armies to be built around. The Eternal Continuum is actually a cult. It is found on nearly every planet in the Thousand Worlds, although it is officially outlawed within the Marcher Worlds and the ISA. Technologically advanced and living in the shadows, the goal of the cult is to achieve immortality and mastery over human flesh. These guys will merge themselves with machines, take cybernetics, with the goal of ultimately becoming immortal. Unfortunately, because of their illegal nature, They are often seen as pirates and raiders by the other powers, and their armies are built upon these zealots that have been promised immortality. Join us, and you may achieve immortality. But you got to fight on a battlefield first. They're known to be rather cold and ruthless, so their initiates don't tend to have a fairly high survival rate. They are ruled over by one single mysterious individual. There are some theories floating around as to who that is. It is currently believed to actually be a former War Machine universe character. Exactly which one is up for some debate. Wildcards are not officially a full faction, at least for now, although I wouldn't be surprised if in the long run they are their own thing. They represent various individuals who will work for multiple factions, and when you build an army, you can take them alongside your other factions. They're mercenaries, criminals, and even some stranger things that abound. Enough of humanity for a while. Let's talk aliens. The Empyreans, which is a faction that is coming soon, coming in the next wave, I suspect we'll see them by mid-next year, are the artificial army of the architects. So the architects are the guys who built the Warp Gate network. They actually managed to conquer the entire galaxy using this artificial army. And what they were doing when they conquered the galaxy is they were collecting the souls of all of these living beings and pouring them into a device called the Great Constellation. Exactly what this is and what it's intended to do is not yet revealed. However, with their conquest of the galaxy, they were actually caught off guard by the arrival of humanity, which started a conflict the Empyreans were not prepared for, and the Empyreans were forced to retreat back to Sirius Prime. However, with Arc waning and with 5,000 years to rebuild, they have returned. And they are trying to stabilize the Arc supply, which is used to fuel their great constellation, and their great work will be able to continue. Lastly are the Keepers. Now, the Keepers are implied to be a new faction coming. There are a very, very small number of them. They're actually humans who transferred their souls into clockwork vessels, and they are ancient. They are older than humanity's presence in the Sirius galaxy. They actually came from the original world, where they served as guides for humanity and shepherded them into this new existence. They serve that role now, and it is in fact the Keepers who are able to train new Warcasters. They are actually the Cult of Sirius members who joined the Exodus into the new galaxy. They're the ones who built the Stargate, and they followed its survivors through. They are ruled by a being known only as Prime. It's heavily implied that this is actually Artificer Prime Nemo from War Machine. And it's worth noting that they are not currently a faction, but they are listed as a faction in the rulebook alongside the Empyreans. So it is currently believed that they will eventually make their own appearance. So with the world dealt with, or at least a primer to it, let's talk about some key mechanics here. First off, the most notable thing about this game that is very important is it is an alternating activation game. What that means is, unlike Warhammer, where you will be sitting there waiting while your opponent rolls dice and tells you to remove models, you're only going to be able to go with 2 units before your opponent is going to get a chance to respond. And a unit is any entity in the game. Units could be warjacks, they could be squads, they could be solos. There are vehicles coming as well. During your turn, you can activate 2 units, anything, and then 1 solo. When they do so, they get a token that says, hey, you've activated, you cannot go again until this token is cleared. And should you ever run out of stuff to go with, you just remove all those tokens. So you're always going to have something to do. You're never going to be looking down and going, oh, I don't have any models left to go with. And I think that's a very important note. Some alternating activation games really struggle with what happens when there's an unbalanced number of models on both sides. This game addresses that by saying, well, you just reset. So you could have one guy go 3 times in a turn, or 3 times in a round. That's not unheard of. The game features a finite turn limit, depending on the size of the game. The game sizes are skirmish and full battle. In a skirmish, you can pick any 8 units plus 1 hero. In a full-size game, you can pick 15 units plus 3 heroes. The skirmish games are played for 3 turns over 3 rounds, so 9 total turns. And the full-size battles are fought with 5 turns over 5 rounds. This means that there's a set endpoint, you can plan ahead. There is no point system. You simply take the appropriate number of units, 8 or 15. Now you may be saying, well, how do you balance that? What's to stop me from just taking the 8 best things I can? There's 2 things. First off, the ability to get these troops on the table is limited. You don't start with your army on the table. You actually start with a very, very small portion of it and then summon in more. Better things cost more summoning points, or more of the summoning resource. But that summoning resource is the same resource you're going to use to fire off your abilities as the Warcaster and to fuel your troops on the battlefield to do unlock abilities. So it's a very limited resource. In the gameplay we found it is very tight. So things that are very expensive are very hard to get out. There's a cost to it, but it's an opportunity cost. Additionally, it's worth noting that some of the scoring is limited to certain types of units. So Warjacks, for example, are some of the best units in the game, but they don't score in every scenario. You need units, you need troops, you need solos behind it to do that. Summoning and respawning, you actually summon your troops onto the battlefield, and you do that by deploying warp gates, assigning arc, which is a resource to that warp gate, and then using that arc to summon troops on subsequent turns. One important note there, they appear at the end of your turn, so they don't get to do anything until after your opponent's had a chance to respond. It's one of my biggest complaints against the way Warhammer and Age of Sigmar does their summoning is it's done during your turn, and those things can go and do things before your opponent can respond. Additionally, when any unit is destroyed, unless it's a hero, they are actually put back into your pool and can be resummoned later. So you can't get tabled unless they kill everything on the table and you have no spawn gates, which is very difficult. So you don't have to worry about, oh, well, my whole army died. Who cares? Just bring it back. The last cool mechanic I want to point out is there's a deck building mechanic. Now, I mentioned that a little bit kind of as a tangent that you're the Warcaster. The idea of the game is you're the Warcaster sitting there in your mothership ordering your troops about at this hololithic table and ordering them to move. You can actually affect this battlefield by using what are called ciphers. They're effectively spells. You play a cipher card, you resolve the effect. They can range from giving your troops extra armor, to making them make an extra attack, to firing a fireball at your opponent. What you have access to, however, is determined by a deck building mechanic. You build a deck of cards. There's 6 types of cipher. 4 types of cipher, I'm sorry. There's 4 types. You must choose at least 3 of each type, and you can have no more than 15 cards in total. You have 5 in your hand at any time. If your deck runs out, you just recycle it. So it allows you to, even with the same army, with your cipher cards, tune how it operates. It could be much more aggressive. It could be more manipulative or more control-based, where you're messing with your activation tokens to say, oh, my Warjack already went. I'm going to play a card that says he gets to pull his token off and gets to go again, at least before his normal chance would. Which is a very interesting mechanic. I found that this system is very deep. And we've already kind of tangented into this as my personal commentary. We've played it. The game is fantastically simple. The first round, if you watch our battle report, Dave is a brand new player. Is very, very, he's still working through everything. By the time we get to the end of the game, though, it's boom, 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 boom. We know what we're doing. After one round, you got a good feel for it. My only complaint is there's a lot of steps in the round, and you may have noticed in our battle report, we actually go back a few times and say, oh, you forgot to play a card. Oh, you forgot to drop a spawn gate. That's just experience, but that's my only comment with the mechanics. The game does use proprietary dice, but it's slightly less egregious for me because they are replaceable with these 6s pretty reliably. A few other notes here. Like I said, I found the mechanics of this game are excellent. I'm usually not a fan of summoning, and that's actually a turnoff for me in a lot of games, but it works here because they apply a resource to it, a very, very tight and controlled resource. That is, I think, the brilliance of the system is that, if you're like me and say, oh, well, I don't like summoning, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. It actually, I found that there's a lot to it, and it's not as egregious as it is in many other systems. It's also odd that the smaller of the two game sizes is actually my personal favorite. I actually kind of wish that there was a third middle size, and I would pretty much play that exclusively if there was. The models themselves are typical privateer press. Now, what do I mean by that? You can see by this little hover vehicle here, it's kind of cartoony. That's just their visual style. If you're looking for hyper-realistic military equipment, you're not going to find it here. It's got a slightly kind of bulgy cartoon feel to it. It's also a little bit heroic, so the proportions of the individual models can be off a little bit. They are dealing with all metal and resin models. Everything I've encountered so far is metal, although I suspect some of the bigger stuff will be resin. It's a privateer press resin and metal model. They go together phenomenally well with almost no issues. So not much to complain about there. I have heard some criticisms about the sculpt, saying the game looks, visually the models look terrible. I don't disagree with you, but I think it's the paint scheme, not the sculpt quality. There are some bad sculpts. I can think of at least one right off the top of my head that I think looks abysmal. But a lot of the ones I've seen people point to and say that looks terrible, I think it's more the paint job and the photography. Having seen them done up in alternate color schemes, I've been very pleasantly surprised by how interesting and visually appealing the models look. Speaking of visuals, I found the game seems to be a cross between Infinity and Destiny. You definitely get that high-tech, almost cyberpunk feel, but with that, Destiny has almost a fantasy flair to it on top of that, and this is kind of sitting in a cross between the two. While the world itself has a very Mass Effect-y vibe to it. It's about exploration. There's a whole lot going on in terms of, there's various factions vying for power across planets. It's got a very heavy theme of there's more to it. And I quite like that. Mechanically, I haven't found a game that this tends to match up very well with. It does have aspects of many other games. Infinity, for example, has a finite number of turns plus your orders. So it has a very there's almost an activation economy where you have to think about, I need to get over here and I only have X number of turns to do it. Unlike, say, Warhammer, where you're able to move across the table, the stuff in this game is actually, or you're able to move across the table over the course of a game. The low turn count, the way that the activations work, and the general slow speed of models means that it's very hard to redeploy your army in this game. You're better off just summoning more troops. So it's got that very, very constrained activation feel of Infinity, but it combines with the attrition style of a game like Monster Apocalypse, where when your stuff dies, it just comes back. So it's this very strange amalgamation. It doesn't quite match up with any one particular game, but it pulls from a lot of other ones, and I think that's to its advantage, because talking with people about miniature games, there's a number of very modern concerns that have cropped up recently. Generally, people don't like games where there's a lot of downtime. You're waiting for your opponent to activate their army. You're waiting for your opponent to do all of these things. And you're just sitting there waiting, taking models off as they kill them. And that's not terribly exciting. I've seen 30-minute Warhammer turns. Here, the turns play very quickly. There's very little downtime. But you also have concerns with, say, attrition. Warhammer is really bad. If I keep harping on Warhammer, it's because it's the most visually, most well-known game. You can pick on War Machine too. Let's pick on War Machine. War Machine has an attrition problem. If you get behind, where half your army's dead, but your opponent hasn't lost anything, it can be very difficult to come back. Now, War Machine does it through massive combos. Warhammer doesn't really do that. This game says, well, just summon more guys. There is a little bit of momentum going on to it, but because there's so many things going on, I found it's very hard to just camp a spawn gate and just, oh, a bunch of guys showed up, kill them all. Oh, a bunch of guys showed up, kill them all. It doesn't quite work that way, because your opponent can always just chuck another spawn gate out, but even then, with the activation system, with the way the scenarios work, with that finite turn limit, you really can't just sit there mowing down guys as they come out of warp gates. You'll never win. It's a very I want to say strange, but not in a bad way. It's a very unique feeling game. I'm very consistently been surprised with what's going on. So I really like it. I have to admit, I really like it. Like I said, my biggest complaint right now is, it's not really a complaint, is I think that I wish there was a middling size between the two styles of game. And I also really am curious to see what this game looks like in 2 years when more factions have come out, when the existing factions have more models. I'm really curious to see what's going on here. So thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Nick here with What Game Now. If you liked the video, drop a like. If you haven't subscribed to us, please do so. If you have any comments, please, let's go ahead and talk about this. I've been very pleasantly surprised with this game. In fact, I think it actually has supplanted War Machine as my preferred game, at least in this style. It's very, it's strange because I could see this being a totally casual game, but at the same time, it has fantastic competitive potential. But somehow it's done it in a way that I don't feel like there's a big difference between casual play and competitive play. If you're playing the game and you're making any attempt to win whatsoever, I don't think there's a distinction between a casual player and a competitive player at that standpoint. It's fascinating. I really got to admit, Privateer Press is, it feels like a home run. Honestly, it feels like a grand slam. Um, it there's so many little things with this game that really strike me as good ideas. Now, my long-term concern, of course, is power creep, mechanics creep, and also just model bloat. I will be very curious to see if they go through and stop faction releases after a while. Say, hey, X models come out, there is a point where it's finished, and we'll have other factions to it. I just, We're going to be playing more of this. We've played multiple games so far. If you haven't watched our gameplay of this yet, go do it. Dave is literally screaming at the end of it. He's having so much fun. Like, it came down to the wire. And every game we've played has felt that way. And not in a bad way. Not like, oh, well, it doesn't matter how good you are, it's just roll dice. And I've very, very pleasantly been surprised by that. So, anyway, Nick here, signing off. Have a good one, guys.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.